Chris Lee and Blayne Gilmer of Southeastern 14 here to talk about one of the most anticipated matchups of the college football season. This one comes in week 1. It'll be college football's version of Monday Night Football. Just was a year ago. You can see that on ABC, September the 3rd. You got LSU going up against Florida State, and two teams with national title aspirations, Blayne, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, big aspirations we've said on the show a time or two, and that certainly both of these teams have that. You see on our graphic there, a lot of returning production, particularly for Florida State on both sides of the ball, LSU on the offensive side of the ball. We've talked, since we are SEC focused here on Southeastern 14, we've talked at length, Chris, about how much Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock have coming back in year 2 on that offensive side of the ball, led by Jayden Daniels. So it's going to be a kind of strength on strength matchup. And I know you're going to kind of break some of that down with numbers and things of that nature, but you couldn't ask for a more a more high-powered matchup. And listen, it was great last year. That game came down to the very end last year, and little did we know that both of those teams would make such a big step forward in the 2022 season.
Yeah, I think both these teams have got a chance to be really good on both sides of the ball. My question might be LSU's defense and with the secondary with some vacancies there. But let's get into LSU's offense, because with Jayden Daniels a year ago, those guys were really good on most nights. You've got a dual threat quarterback, just as you do for Florida State. You've got one of the better receiving cores in the league. You've got a good tight end. You've got 2 freshman left tackles who are now sophomores who were very talented. You got an LSU team that looks primed to be really good on offense. The running game, I'm not going to call it a question. I just think there's a lot of guys who could carry the load for them, and I don't know that there's like an obvious superstar. But I like LSU to be even better offensively than it was a year ago. We'll talk about Florida State's defense in a minute, because I think they've got a chance to be pretty special too. But LSU, I think, in my mind, should be better offensively this year.
Yeah, just so much continuity, right? We've talked about, I think when our team preview, the word was continuity and experience. Well, you've got the 2 freshman tackles from last year, Will Campbell and Emory Jones, back. And listen, it's sink or swim when you throw freshmen out there in major college football at right and left tackle. And, for the most part, they swam and help LSU get to the SEC championship game last year. But now, with a whole year under their belt, a whole year in Mike Denbrock's system, not only does it allow Jayden Daniels to be able to be more comfortable in the system, but now he's got that rapport with his offensive line where, listen, they can check protections if they need to. These receivers know better where their built-in hots and all that kind of stuff is, so the adjustments that you can make on the fly. But I agree with you. The question is, can LSU manufacture more of a running back based running game behind that offensive line? Listen, they're not going to shackle Jayden Daniels. He's still going to get his runs, but I do think for the long-term success of this LSU team that I think they will need to watch his carries a little bit, not let him get hit so much. I know he's beefed up a little bit. You said it didn't look like it at SEC Media Days. He was still like a string bean, but Brian Kelly says that he has added weight this year, so he's bulked up some in preparation to try to take some of those hits. But, you saw last year, Josh Williams was a guy who started to come on late for them. Chris, in the last 5 games for LSU, Josh Williams really started to come on and solidify himself as that top running back. In the last 5 games, he averaged 7.12 yards per carry for LSU. So, just something to keep an eye on there. But, between Noah Cain, they got Logan Diggs that transferred in as well. Armani Goodwin's there, and we mentioned Josh Williams. So one of those guys, maybe a collective of those guys can step up and help Jayden Daniels. But when you've got a receiving core like that, like you mentioned, Chris, if you just get a modicum of a run game going, you're going to have success through the air.
Florida State's defense last year was pretty special. I'm just looking at some of the numbers, and you can see them on the ticker below. We do yards per rush play and passing play that adjusts for sacks, which of course were intended to be a passing play, but go in the books as a rushing play in the stats. And when you take that out, Florida State gave up less than 5 yards on each side, rushing and passing. To do that passing wise in this day and age is phenomenal. You look at what they've got coming up. You start on the defensive line. Well, they've got Jared Verse at defensive line. He's a potential All-ACC guy. They've got Fentrell Cypress at corner. I know that you keep up with the transfer market and how they loaded up there. This is a Florida State defense that's going to be really stout again. Now, I think if you want to maybe have one knock on them, and maybe this is just a fluky thing, they only forced turnovers, I think 1.7% of snaps a year ago, but didn't really matter because they were just that hard to score on.
Yeah, you see down there, Fisk, Cypress, and Edmond, the guys that came in for that FSU defense, just kind of adding some guys. A couple of those, Cypress and Fisk, may end up being starters. But whether you want to downplay the SEC, the ACC conference as a whole and its strength last year or not, you can't ignore how much Florida State has returning, as you mentioned, the playmakers and the ability that they had just to stifle opposing offenses last year. So, I agree with you with those additions this year to that already salty defense, Chris. It could be quite a undertaking for opposing offenses to try to crack that code there that is the Florida State defense this year.
Yeah, Fabian Lovett. I knew I was forgetting somebody. They've also got him on the defensive line too. That's just another star for a star-studded unit. All right, let's talk about offense. Man, this team was so tough to stop both ways a year ago. I look at the averages per running play, per passing play, at 6 yards per rushing play, even 8.1 per passing play, at 1.7% turnover rate. And of course, in a really strong year for quarterbacks, Florida State probably isn't going to trade Jordan Travis for much of anybody.
No, he's a Heisman Trophy candidate himself. Him and Jayden Daniels both. I wouldn't be shocked if they end up in New York this year. That's how good the quarterback matchup could be in this game and throughout the year for these two teams could prove to be so. He's an experienced guy. And when it comes down to it, he's got experience right there beside him and his running mate, so to speak, and Trey Benson at running back. And that's always a quarterback's best friend when you have a strong running game. But also, Chris, you already had Johnny Wilson and Winston Wright there coming back as experienced guys. But then you add Keon Coleman, who's a bona fide star that's going to be down there that transferred in from Michigan State. It is exciting times for Mike Norvell and that offense down there at Florida State.
Well, it should be exciting times for LSU's defense too. Harold Perkins Jr. is a player of the year candidate in the league on that side of the ball. LSU gets back its best defensive lineman from a year ago, I think went out in the FSU game.
Yeah.
Moving Perkins inside, adding some guys in the transfer market. LSU was good on defense a year ago, maybe not great, but good. And I think, look, it's not vintage LSU when you think about some of those national title level defenses they had, but it's one that's going to look a lot more like vintage LSU than it did the last year of Coach Ed Orgeron, and should be pretty good. And again, having Perkins step up into year two in a new spot on that defense and just getting some healthy guys back. Mekhi Wingo, another guy on the defensive line who was healthy a year ago, but he's another one of their stars. I don't know that this is one of the best, most talked about defensive units in the country, but maybe it should be.
Yeah, the front seven is pretty special with what they're going to be able to put out there with a healthy Maason Smith. You mentioned that was just a huge blow to that LSU defense last year, because that is a guy that, much like a Jalen Carter for Georgia last year, he's a guy that if you can't afford to block him one-on-one on the inside. If you try to do a one-on-one matchup, he's going to beat you. You have to, account for him on the interior in your pass protection. But then last year they were able to throw out Harold Perkins. Well, Brian Kelly said the problem was we didn't have that guy that was able to really win those one-on-one matchups on the inside, so everybody could kick their protection towards Harold Perkins. Well, now Florida State or anybody else this year is not going to know, to your point, Chris, where Harold Perkins is going to line up. Sometimes he may be inside as an inside backer. They may still walk him out on the edge, but they also have Smith and Wingo there on the inside that they feel can win a one-on-one matchup. So it's kind of pick your poisons when you're designing the protections to be able to prevent LSU's front seven from getting to the quarterback. Now, it helps Florida State to have that experienced quarterback like a Jordan Travis, like we just mentioned, and also a new security blanket at tight end, Jaheim Bell, that we didn't even talk about, who's from SEC territory, transfers over from South Carolina to Florida State. So just another tremendous addition there for Florida State, and that can help alleviate pressure. But when you're talking about this LSU defensive front, and you add Ovi Ahofu from Texas as well, who can pressure the quarterback. I just really like this group. Savion Jones is underrated. I feel like this is going to be a luxury for Brian Kelly with both added experience and some health back, and then the ability to move Harold Perkins around that they did not have last year. He said at this point last year, Harold Perkins, even late in the year last year, he said he was just out there playing athlete. He wasn't playing linebacker. Now he has learned how to play linebacker, and they're going to be that much better because of it.
Trying to look at some intangibles here. Florida State was fairly disciplined a year ago. I think it gave up about 40 yards a game in terms of penalties, which is really good. Don't have LSU's number in front of me. 54 yards a game, there it is, which is about average. But Brian Kelly needed to bring a lot of discipline to Baton Rouge. It probably took a year for a culture change to settle in. So I think both teams should be pretty disciplined, one based on history, the other one based on who's coaching. Special teams, both those had some issues a year ago. LSU lost that game.
Especially because, the SEC championship game.
But Florida State, I think, had some kicking issues a year ago. So I don't know. I mean, I would think that Brian Kelly's going to spend a year getting them better. I don't know that if you start looking at intangibles, anybody's got anything there. Now, if you look at venue, I think that's going to favor Florida State being in Orlando. Now, LSU fans will travel, I'm sure, but I'm guessing that Florida State's going to have the advantage being at home. I think that's a pretty good guess, to be honest. Last year it was in Baton Rouge, which was not too far for Florida State fans to go. But anything else in this game, now that we've broken down the matchups on both sides of the ball, that you think is maybe worth a mention that we haven't hit on?
I really just wonder who can establish a running game early, who can kind of penetrate the other's defensive line. Because you look at, we didn't, mention him by name, but for Florida State, Jared Verse, Chris, could have been a first round draft pick. And that tells you the power of NIL nowadays. Florida State able to retain a guy like that. He could have been, people were talking about him as a possible first round draft pick. He elected to come back to Florida State. And now, you got him on that side of the ball, Maason Smith and Harold Perkins on the defensive front for LSU. Can Florida State get Trey Benson going? How much do they run Jordan Travis early? And the same thing, which running back steps up for LSU? How much do they run Jayden Daniels? I think whoever can get some of that ground game going early, those wide receiving cores for both sides are so talented, Chris, that once you have to commit another guy down into the box to start stopping the run, and they get one-on-one matchups with a Johnny Wilson for FSU or with a Malik Nabors for LSU, that's when you could start see a pivot point in this game and somebody really start to get a foothold and take an advantage.
All right, picks and why. And I'll be honest, I'm on the fence about this one. This one, it was a coin flip game a year ago. I think it's a coin flip game this year too.
Yeah, in terms of Vegas right now, the latest that I've seen at DraftKings and FanDuel that we put up on the graphic a while ago, LSU favored by 2.5 points. Our predictive model that we're going to get more in depth to later on, we've got LSU about a 1.5 point favorite. So it's really close. But when it comes down to it, I believe in Jordan Travis too. I think he's gonna be great. But I really believe Jayden Daniels going from year 1 to year 2 under Mike Denbrock with those receivers that I think are arguably the best entire wide receiving core in the country, and you add Aaron Anderson on top of it that transferred in from Alabama, a former 5-star from Edna Karr High School in New Orleans. Landon Abetta is there. They got all kinds of depth on top of Nabors, Thomas, and Lacey. So I think with that embarrassment of riches and an entire offseason to be the guy for Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock, I think Jayden Daniels takes the next step in his game. And I think more of those, as I like to call them, that more of those liquored up Cajuns travel than you think over there to Orlando. Give me LSU to win this one. I'm going to take LSU winning 27-21, probably a late scoring drive led by Jayden Daniels, get an early Heisman Trophy moment early.
I'm going to go with our model. I was really on the fence. The Orlando part of it makes me a little nervous. The fact that Florida State's defense is, I think, better on paper coming in makes me a little nervous. That more proven, I guess, is a better way to put it. But LSU went through a meat grinder of a schedule last year in the SEC and did things I think we thought weren't possible. Most people had LSU a 4th or 5th pick in the West last year. And then LSU was not LSU yet coming into that game. And still, if it could have executed a simple field goal, would have won the game. Now, look, Florida State got better too, okay? So let's be fair. I think it's a coin flip game. I'll go with our model because we spent some time working on that, and I like it, but I don't feel great about it. I would not put any amount of money on this one. I think it could go either way, and I can give you the reasons why. But I will go with LSU by a point just because I have to make a pick.
What's your score? What score do you think? What's it looking like?
Oh, let's go 27-26. I think it was 24-23 last year. I like a few more points just because I love
somebody's missing an extra point in this one too. Special teams. It always comes down to special teams for Chris.
It always does. I mean, like I said, good luck with you trying to figure this one out. I just think it's a super game and can't wait to watch it. We are going to be previewing every single football game involving SEC teams this year. So we've got our week 1 schedule coming up. Be sure to hit your subscribe button there so you can get notified when we put these out. Also hit your notifications button so that you can get notified when we put these out. Hit the like button. That helps our analytics, and tell a friend. He is Blayne Gilmer. I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.